there we go. Okay, so today we'll have, I think, a very interesting presentation that is a bit different from what we normally have, I think. Amanda de Pre will present Thinking Through Images, approaching Aby Warburg and the Digital Arts and Humanities Now, if I pronounced that correctly, but we'll hear that later. Amanda, the floor is yours.
I'm just putting on my screen to say hi to everybody, just so that you know I am human and not an artificial intelligence. But I'm also not going to share my screen while presenting. So let's get into, can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay, so should I share again, Mena? Do you think? Share screen. Okay, there it is. Can you see something now?
Yep, definitely.
Okay, wonderful. Okay. Thank you, Mena. Thank you for inviting me to give this talk. And thank you for everybody for joining, and also for being patient as we extended it for the few weeks. I've titled my talk Thinking Through Images. It could have been Thinking with Images, which would have been just as appropriate, or just Thinking Images. And it comes from the work that I'm doing as a visual culture scholar, who's also, let's say, flirting with digital humanities and seeing how I can make the two fields talk to one another. So the title of my talk, Thinking Through Images, Approaching Aby Warburg and Digital Humanities and the Arts. Now, first of all, I share with you the process that I go through and the questions that I ask myself, because I work with images. And as Menno just said, images are perhaps the stepchild of digital humanities, and there are specific reasons for that. There are not many image projects, as many as others. It's more a text-driven research field. But I work with images, so I had to ask myself, if you're dealing with images, what do you do? What are your options? And these are the ones that I could come up with and that I've been asking myself how to deal with it. So the first option is you can digitize images. And by that, I also mean there are very sophisticated digital imaging and processing projects where you can 3D scan images and you can look at an artifact from any angle. So that is an option. Or you can only use digitally born images. And as you're going to see in my project, I prefer the latter, to use digitally born images. The other option is to aggregate images in a digital archive. And that is to link the data specifically with the metadata of the images. And I think that is a very worthwhile project, but in essence, one is then building a digital archive. Okay. The other option is to use image recognition and AI and machine learning to discern patterns. And this is a more sophisticated interaction with images, probably, and one in which I am not skilled enough to really dabble in. Or do you treat the image, and this is where I want to link my project and the ideas that I'm putting forward this morning. Do you treat the image as a distinct data unit? In other words, if you treat the image as image data in and of itself. And I think that is what's been hampering digital humanities and the use of images, is because the image is not something that you can easily fragment. You have to work with the image as image data if you want to deal with the image. And if I can also just say, when I use the concept image, one must link this to it's more philosophical use of the term image. In other words, a picture, for instance, it's something that you can hang on a wall, and a painting, or a sculpture is something that you can put in a gallery. An image is something that transcends mediums and travels between platforms and mediality. In other words, it's the essence of that which travels across different platforms and mediums. And I think that's also very important to understand. And I think that also links with if we treat images as image data in and of themselves. So those are the questions that I ask myself. How do I want to deal with images in a digital humanities project? Now, I'm sharing with you projects of people who in the past already used the image as image data. And this is, and I'm sorry if you are all familiar already with Selfie City by Lev Manovich and his software studies. But I think this is one of the first major projects where the image was taken as image data. And you can see the data collection process there on the right-hand side, my right-hand side. So what this project deals with is to take selfies from cities all over the world, and then use mechanical Turks to decide whether this photo is a selfie or self-portrait or not, and then also estimate the gender, and then also use recognition, and this is a face analysis software to see the age, the mood, the tilting of the head, and so forth. And in the end, this project, the data is still available online, anyone can use it. One could determine obvious answers like women take more selfies than men, yes. Also, some cities are friendlier than others. In other words, Bangkok, I think people smiled more than in Berlin. One could also probably, if you wanted to be a little bit facetious, you could also determine that or guess that beforehand. But it's a large data collection of images and telling us, you know, what we can do with these images if we treat them as image data. Another project, and I'm just showing you a few projects that use the image as image data. And this also comes from the Culture and Analytics Lab. And in this case, you see image plot of artworks by Mondrian on the left and of Roscoe, Mark Roscoe on the right-hand side. Both abstract, well, not expressionist, maybe more Roscoe, but more abstract artists. And then a comparison of the hue and saturation over a 13-year period of artworks that is then mapped and plotted onto an image plot. Here you can see that Mondrian uses more lighter colors, where you see Roscoe on the right-hand side, very more dark colors to the left-hand side, and to the top, more warm blue, warm yellows and oranges. So it's an interesting plotting of two artists' oeuvre to see the difference in color use. And I think one could also have predicted this with Mars Roscoe committing suicide in the end and also becoming perhaps the last great expressionist or abstract artist. And you can see that also from the dark coloring and the dark paintings on the image plot. So that is an example of how you can use images as image data. Then there's another one, and I mean, you are familiar with this one. This is from the Digital Humanities Lab from the Yale University. And what they've done is they've used the covers of Vogue and created an average of each year. So what you see is images of the cover, which they then, of course, remapped and reshaped so they can all fit on one onto the other from 1900s to the 2000s. And here at the bottom, I show you the difference in what happened when they actually averaged these covers. The 1940s cover, and this is only for the year 1940. It's not all the 1940, 41, so forth. It's for the year 1940 and the year 1950 and the year 1970 and 1980. As you can see from the images in the 1940s and 50s, it's more difficult to determine a pattern, and because the images do not really correspond to a specific idea. We can, however, see that the human figure is used more in these covers. Then we move to the 70s and 80s, and we can see perhaps the culture of beauty coming to the fore, where there's a very specific formula And the image of the averaging of images of Vogue's in the 1980s really show that there's almost more or less a place where the eyes of the model appears. So we can see a definite formula for creating the Vogue covers from the 1980s and 1970s. So a very interesting project with using images as data. However, I want to link with one of the great figures in art history. Although he was a reluctant art historian, he would probably refer more to himself as a critical someone who uses iconology critically, and he referred to himself as an image historian. Now, Aby Warburg created and I'm not going to try to present myself here as a scholar of Aby Warburg. I'm just going to introduce you to some basic ideas that I find useful when looking at Aby Warburg's work. He created what he called a Bilderatlas Mnemosyne. And what this is an image atlas that consisted of different incantations. In other words, the image that you see online is a specific formulation of this Bilderatlas in 1927. So what he did is he used huge black panels of cloth, and then he stuck onto these cloth panels images. And these images would have the different panels, would have different themes, and he would often change the images, and he would even use wool, it is said, to make links physically between images from one panel to the other, which is already, as you can see, hyperlinking, and it's already a reference to how the internet pretty much works. So we have different manifestations of this Bilderatlas. And the last one was in 1929, which is also unfortunately the year in which Warburg died. The idea was to put this all in a printed format, but this never happened. So we are left with the legacy of Warburg, and what you see on screen here is the exhibition in 2020 in Berlin, where the latest manifestation of the Bilderatlas, the 1929 version, was exhibited, consisting of 63 panels and about 971 images. So people could now be immersed and walk through these recreated Bilderatlas. Now, a Bilderatlas is, of course, it's a German word, Bilder, reference to image. It's an image atlas that was created by Warburg. I also give you the URL. One can now luckily go for a virtual exhibition. You can, when you visit the Warburg Institute in London's website, you can actually now immerse yourself in the project and look at all the panels and all the images through this virtual exhibition. How do I link, or how did my interest spark with Warburg? I had the opportunity to write a chapter for this Routledge Companion to Digital Humanities and Art History in 2020. And in this chapter, which you can see is pretty much the title of my talk this morning, I could actually extract certain ideas from Warburg that I found interesting, and ideas that I started to work on in my own endeavor to work with images and digital humanities. So the first guiding Warburgian concept that I could extract from the reading and from the afterlife of all his work is, importantly, and that is something you're going to see in the project that I'm proposing here as well, is the idea that images are units that migrate and they have meaning that consistently travel over time. So images is migrating units of meaning. And he has very fancy German words for that, which I'm not going to bore you with. But in essence, Warburg says that images have an afterlife, a Nachleben. In other words, they survive and they keep repeating themselves. Now, in Warburg's case, he used mainly images from antiquity to the Renaissance. That was the periods that he linked, and the migrating images between those two periods. What I will be trying to do is use contemporary images to see if they are also still migrating units of meaning. The other important concept of most people who are familiar with Warburg will immediately know what this means. He identified within these migrating units of meanings, which images are, a pathos formel, and a pathos formula, in other words. And he said that there are certain pictorial representations of expressive gestures that repeat themselves almost as in a formula, but also not in the strict sense of a formula as we probably think of it, but a pictorial representation of gestures that are effective and affective as well, and travel across time, and they have a appeal. They directly speak to us because of this pathos formula that they embody. The other concept that I could pick up that I think is useful within the digital humanities is the idea of framing. Now, within art history, we've always used framing because either using printed versions of images or through slides or through the screen in the contemporary moment. But in Warburg's case, these panels that he created, these large black panels onto which the images were stuck, these are frames. And they operate both as conceptual and as structural structures or systems. He referred to these panels and the way they operate next to one another as a denkraam. In other words, something that focuses the attention and frames and tells us this is in this scene. These are the images that I've placed next to one another to create a thinking place or frame. And for Warburg, it was also very important that there is a discussion or a dialogue between the images or the panels themselves, which he referred to as the tussenraam. That's what is between. That also links with the last point that I make here between the close and distant reading, because one could look at the image in itself, one image, and then zoom out and look at the panel and then all the panels as a form of distant reading. Okay, so framing as both a conceptual and structural strategy, very important for Warburg. Then I think it's very important to understand that Warburg he didn't create an encyclopedia, he didn't create an archive. He created an atlas and an image atlas, which is already a networked atlas as well. So an atlas is a different form of creating knowledge in the sense that you go to a specific page and you look at an image, which leads you then to another in an unstructured way. So it creates insight, and it's also links with imagination. It also sparks the imagination. And I think in Warburg's case, it is always for him, it is a play between rationality and the imagination. So the atlas is a very useful tool to spark and to work with rationality and the imagination both. He also used the principle of the good neighbor. Now, this is perhaps not that useful for the discussion at the moment, but nevertheless, I think it's an interesting idea to look at. The principle of the good neighbor is, and I think many of us who are researchers would immediately understand what I refer to when I say this. If one goes to the library and you look for a specific book, you often find that the book that you're really interested in is the book next to the book that you were looking for. In other words, you start by browsing and you see interesting things around the book that you were actually looking for. This also applies in Warburg's case, because in the Warburg Institute, it consists of a library, and it also consists of photographic collection. So the same idea applies when Warburg talks about images, is that you may be looking for one specific image, but then you find that the image next to or in the vicinity to the image that you were looking for is actually just as interesting and puts you onto another path. And that is the principle of the good neighbor, which can also be replicated online, but it will probably work in a different way than the physical going to the library and searching in the library. And then, of course, in Warburg's creating of an atlas, which he framed through these panels, there is the movement constantly between a close and a distant reading, moving in and moving out. And with that, you know, the change between looking at a specific image and then the image relation to the whole panel, and then the panels as they are related to one another. So I think these are guiding Warburgian concepts that guided my own insight as to why I think Warburg is important for doing digital humanities, and also specifically within digital art history. Good. Now, there are many people already working, and they've always been from Warburg's death, working on his legacy. And here you see online a very good digital humanities project by a leading scholar, Christopher Johnson, who's also published extensively on Warburg, the Mnemosyne meandering through the Bilderatlas. And what he's done here, and he's not digitized all the panels yet. I think he's been able to digitize 10 of them, but the viewer can now actually get a close-up look of those panels that have already been digitized, and you can zoom in, and you can click on each image and get a very wonderful description by theorists and experts on the kind of paintings and images that Warburg used. So I think in terms of digitizing Warburg's project, Johnson's project is already a leading proponent of what can be done. And it's an excellent example of Warburgian scholarship, if I can put it that way. Now, just to give you also an idea, which I perhaps should have said earlier, and I don't want you to read through this whole slide, but just to give you an idea, all those panels that Warburg repeated and showed against one another and changed continuously, he did use themes for those. And this is just to give you an overview of some of the themes that he used. And you can see astronomy, archaeology, advertisements, and transubstantiation. And so it's broader iconological themes that he used, but he did use themes to structure his thinking. But yet the structuring or the themes, everybody says, and I think you can also, if you look at the images, they are highly enigmatic, and it's not an easy, this panel means this. It's not an easy translation. It is an interpretive use of the panels. So just to give you an idea of the themes that he used. And now I take you to one or two examples of people also contributing to Warburg's legacy by using digital humanities. And here you can see Stefka Ristova, I'm not sure if I pronounce her name correctly, who used color data to analyze a very specific panel. The panel that you see here is panel 45, and as you've seen in the previous slides, mostly the photographs that Warburg used, and he also referred to them as surrogates, were black and white. But here, here's Ristova, she used color slides and to substitute the black and white ones. And then she analyzed two specific paintings. And I'm not sure if you can see my little cursor on the screen, but it's this image and that image. It is the massacre and the Annunciation. And then she makes a very interesting and sophisticated argument by plotting once again through hue and saturation, through image-day software, how the coloring in these two paintings correspond. And then she makes an argument for why they have the same coloring, which actually then justifies why Warburg put them on the same panel. And that's just my interpretation for a very difficult argument, which I'm not going to try to put forward here. But I quote from the end of her project, where she says, I argue that digital art history should continue its investment in contextual visual knowledge by combining quantitative image data paradigms with traditional art history in order to foster critical interpretations of visual culture. And I think it's the combination of those two processes that is very important in taking the Warburg project further. Then somebody that you're all probably very familiar with is Franco Moretti and Leonardo Impet. They put forward a project where they operationalized Warburg's Bartels formula. And what they've done is they've taken the formula back to the gesturing body, the skeleton, and then they annotated the body and the skeleton, and they made certain predictions and extracted certain information from these skeletons and the way they move. And I mean, skeletons, it sounds terrible, but the bodies and the gestures to make or to create a pattern from this. And I know I'm not giving them the justice and sophistication of what the project actually entails. So this is just my version of what I could take from it. But they also end their research project by saying, our morphological model of the Bartels formula is statistically strong, but what are the art historical implications? And I suggest, and that is probably always the question when dealing with images and using more computational methods to analyze the image. The question is always, but what are the art historical implications? Can one from their work now predict the Bartels formula? Probably not. Can one predict these formulas? Can you use them for other images? That could be possible, but it still remains an open question as to what the implications are for art history. Now, and I was sorry once again that I have to refer to one of my own publications, but this is a book that I've published recently, and it's called Art, the Sublime and Movement, Spaced Out. And the reason why I want to share this book with you is because it is the beginning, or it is the first layer of the project. So I've created a monograph, a very scholarly analysis, and with the following key terms, as you can see there: place, space, time, belonging, gravity, displacement, home, falling, navigating, balancing, mobility, flight, void, cyberspace, earth, outer space. Now, if I can be blunt, if I had to put my book into 4 images, those 4 on screen will suffice, because you move from the tightrope walker to the artist using levitation, jumping in the air, to the parkour activist using city space, and to the astronaut leaving Earth behind completely. So the displacement of Earth has been finalized. So in the last image, at least. So the thinking is here that I work with images, and I put a visual argument forward by using images. But 4 images, of course, will not do. And therefore, I'm sorry, I'm indulging you here, or I hope I'm not boring you with this, but this is to book each chapter in images. And once again, I hope it's clear, if you just look at them visually, that there's a progression, perhaps, but but there's a logic to the images. We have from the balancing act to the mountaineer to running as if. All concepts dealing with the themes that I've unpacked or identified previously. The last section of the book, where what has happened in the first section is intensified by up in the air, by the aeronaut, by the cybernaut, and then finally by the astronaut. And now you may ask, what has this to do with the project that I want to propose or that I'm working on? Now, coming from art history, I would like, and also being inspired then by Warburg, I'm working on what I call a spaced out, which is a reference, of course, to the book, a spaced out image atlas. And if you're wondering what the concept spaced out means it's not only a mental state, but it is both the implosion and the explosion of space. And it deals with our very contemporary moment in terms of how we see place, space, and time. And what I've done is I've started an iconological exploration of album covers from 2015 to 2021. And I put forward the research question for me broadly is, how is the worldview of being spaced out depicted through specific identified visual themes, signs, codes, and tropes? And what you see on screen is a selection. It is my version of a Warburg panel in a contemporary guise, where you see selected images from album covers already selected to give you an idea of what such a spaced out image atlas would look like. But how did I go about it? And what is the research methods and the process? Now, my assumption is that the album cover is an iconologically dense artifact that provides brief insight into the artist's worldview consisting of image and text. That's hence the choice of the album cover. What I've started to do is I've used the Album of the Year website to mine images from. And what is good there is that they're all the same size, so it's easily manipulate. You can manipulate them easily, and you can compare them easily. I have started to plot from January to December 2021. It's more or less about 30,000 images in total. I've acted as my own mechanical Turk, and I'll show you what I've done. And I've used the Trophy software, which is a free and open source desk-work knowledge organization application created by the Center for History and New Media from the George Mason University. I have started within Trophy to tag these images with iconological identifiers or notations if you want to. And the identifiers are more or less using my imagination and also what comes from the monograph. I use the astronaut, levitation, flight, space travel, planetary, cosmos, figure in a landscape, and pandemic. And there you can see not all of them are really associated with how many images tagged. And if you're wondering, how did I decide about this tagging and what is included? I've used a very, my own, let's say, primitive iconological notations, which is still open, and I'm still working on them and also expanding on them. But you can see the ideas that I used in tagging, for instance, planetary, a reference to a heavenly body, Earth, Moon, Mars, comets, and so forth. So using these iconological notations with these tags to start building panels and ideas and comparing these images to one another. Just to give you an idea what it looks like within the interface itself, there you see the astronaut folder and the kind of tags that appears within the astronaut panel, the planetary one. And then, as you probably suspected already, the tags correspond and the meanings are layered, and they are interconnected, and I don't think there's a hierarchy to them specifically. But here on screen you can see 4 images or 4 album covers where there is a rich correspondence of tagging and of iconological annotations. Levitation, astronaut, planetary, space travel to the left, and then also the album from where it comes, just to give you an idea what it would look like and how these tags intercorrespond with one another. However, as you probably guessed, I am not new, or I'm not the only person working with iconological notation. And I share a screen from Iconoclast here with you, and their notations for space, unlimited space, expansion, emptiness, void. In other words, interesting terms that I've also identified. So on the next layer of what I'll be doing is I will go to Iconoclast and see how my initial notifications correspond and how I can build on that or collaborate and see how my project can fit into Iconoclast, which already has a very long tradition of iconological structuring and annotations. Then just finally, I build a panel. It's actually 2 panels. It is a contemporary moment of the Warburgian panel, but this on screen is what it would look like if one would start putting these images next to one another. They do tell a story. They do correspond. They do show a certain worldview. And the idea is now to make this into an interface where you can actually click on the images and get more information on the album, and also more about iconological information, and also make it possible for people to participate and give their feedback and tell us what they see and how they see how this fits with that, or with other images, and also trying to link these images then with other art historical images and to see how they could possibly correspond. So all in all, this is how far I got with the project, inspired by Warburg, and then trying to build a spaced out image atlas. Thank you, Menu.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. I think it's a really interesting project. We do have a bit of time for questions. I see that Nicola says, commented, so in libraries, the good neighbor principle, remember that the book next to it might just be as interesting or even more interesting, is referred to as serendipitous discovery. Okay. And
interesting. I didn't know that.
Okay. And Carol says, well done. What a fascinating study. I have a lot of reading to do. Okay, I'm not sure if there are any questions. Okay, Friedel says printed dictionaries also allow this kind of serendipitous discovery, a gap with many online dictionaries. Yeah, so if you read a dictionary finding similar kind of related words, I guess that's what you mean, right, Friedel? Yeah. Okay, Jane says, I entirely agree with Carol. Thank you for a most engaging presentation. I look forward to following up more with the studies. Thank you. Okay, I don't see any questions yet. These are all interesting comments.
No, but I'm sure you have questions for me.
I've got a whole range of questions, but I didn't want to. But Tanya has a question. So, how does working digitally make your work different to working with paper versions?
Paper versions of the images.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a good question, although the digital makes it easier. And what I'm working with are, of course, digitally born images. And that would be, so it's an extension of the printed image, definitely. And it is in the tradition of Warburg, which now has a digital output, if I can put it that way. So yes, which it is the difference is it's an intensification and it's a continuation of the paper version, I would say.
Okay, thanks. Carol says, would you consider tagging with coding? Or is it even
I need someone to help me with that. Yes, Carol, please.
No, I was actually wondering something similar. So the idea of so I really had a question that I removed in the end because you started explaining how you tackle this, but I was really wondering, how do you start this? And I can see some ideas coming from a more computational perspective to do this computationally, but thinking of the paperwork, where do you start? So you have these empty panels, and then I guess you have images that you want to, how do you relate them? How do you put them on there? How do you link them? And now you have a more computational approach, so you can perhaps more easily compare images or analyze images. But even then, how do you do that?
In other words, how did I decide on these images you see on screen, for instance?
Yeah, and how do you order them? How do you
in
relate
other words,
them?
how do I label? How do I use the tagging?
No, so I can see how you do the tagging itself, but how do you then use that tagging to relate the images?
I don't know how to answer that, because I look at the image as an art historical scholar, and then I identify certain topics, certain themes within them that aligns with the book project and what the actual, the key ideas about the book was. So for me, there is a form of imagination, and there is a form of rationality, in the sense that these images are already delimited. So these are not 30,000 images that you see of course, on screen. These are delimited already to those that I've selected through a filter, which aligns with the themes that I want to address. And because these images are so powerful and already selected, when you put them next to one another, you already see what I would argue a worldview unfolding. And that's, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but that is how I do it, and that's how I'm guided. So maybe one could say, but Amanda, you should check yourself with other iconological notations. Yes, I can do that. But also, maybe also from experience with working with images in art history, which gives one a certain eye, if I can say, like Warburg, to start identifying images as visual arguments. I'm not sure if I answer your question.
Yeah, I think this answer. I think this is where really our different backgrounds show.
I'm in. Okay.
Yeah. No, but I think that's really interesting. I do see some more questions in the chat now, and I think they're kind of related to what I just asked. So Etienne says, thank you for the presentation. How do you plan on publishing the results of your album cover work?
So I'm thinking of taking the monograph, because that I think is a very important substantiation for the whole project, putting it into a living book format, and creating a catalog with images, but also an interface online that is linked to the book, to expand on these ideas. So a publication, I want to say an exhibition, but it will be an online exhibition, if at all, if that makes sense. So it will have an online presence and an online life. Etienne, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds definitely good. I was actually, and I know there's more questions in the chat. I actually had a small question kind of related to that. So I was really wondering what happens if you also add the music to the album covers, because it will be completely different.
But see, that's another layer that one can actually, when you click on the image, the image can, or the music can also be added.
Yeah.
But then the music will lead to its own domain or its own analysis. And something else that I haven't said, sorry, is that the text is also very important. I'm not quite sure if you can see online, but some of the images, the text also helps in analyzing and tagging. You can see the astronaut meets Appleman there. So that's another layer, is the actual text or the wording on the album cover, which is also very significant. So it's not only the images, they work in correspondence with the text.
Yeah. Okay, so there was some more comments and questions in the chat. I'll quickly read them. So Carol says that she does research on social media and have most times excluded pictures in her data sets. It's definitely given me ideas to use these images or memes as part of the corpus. And then there was a brief discussion on tagging with coding, essentially refers to kind of computational techniques, so object detection, classification using computer vision techniques. And it then says that they do help, but only get you so far. You just mentions, thanks Amanda for this excellent presentation, very informative. That's quickly an update on the chat. I'm not sure if there are any more questions.
Carol, I can share an article specifically working on memes and Warburg, if that can help as well. Okay. And I mean, I can also share my whole folder on Warburg, because I really fascinating the way he opens up possibilities with working with images, I think. But can I ask, from people who have, you've got far more experience than I have in the computational side. What would you, if you look at the project, what would you add? What would you do?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I think I'm also thinking of this tagging as coding that Carol mentioned. So essentially a computational approach. So if you have, and I think that's mostly because I'm extremely lazy. I don't even want to think about manually annotating the images. So what I would do, but that doesn't give you what you're doing, is take these computational approaches, and then you can do very simple things like, have all the blue images together with the blue images and the red images together with the red images. Of course, you can do a little bit more complex analyses as well. But I think, and that's also what Etienne mentioned, that will only get you so far. So if you look at the images that you have on the screen now, the colors are essentially all over the place.
Yes.
And you've grouped them in a particular way, but it's difficult to see at the kind of shallow properties of the images, which one should go where. So it's more, there's this kind of deeper kind of meaning or insight that you need to fully understand to do this. So even if you can identify the objects in the images, so you can identify that there's people there, for example, even that's not enough to do this, right? Because there are people on the left side and on the right side as well.
Yes.
So I think, and that kind of relates a little bit to another question that I had. So what kind of structure are you looking for? And I think you're looking for a very much kind of meaning-like structure, whereas I think most computational approaches can only find this relatively shallow structure.
And it's also aesthetic. I mean, if we look at the image on screen, I find it aesthetic very pleasing. And it could just be me, but one could actually, if you take it further, you can allow people to fill in their own panels and create their own panels and I don't know, make screensavers or something. So, but there's an aesthetic appeal as well. So they talk to one another, and there's a correspondence, and there's a discussion or a dialogue, a hermeneutical dialogue between them. And yes, I think that is where the meaning resides.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that is very difficult to capture computationally. Quickly, some more comments in the chat. So Carol asks, can you please provide the link for your book again?
Well, thank you, Carol.
And Tanya says the machine learning approach might miss what a human will look for, several things at once. And the panels are very associative. And that's essentially what I was saying as well. So you can capture certain aspects using machine learning, but yeah, really capturing that kind of the insight. Yeah, I'm not sure if I have the right words for it, but because it's not just meaning, it is a bit more, I think, than meaning. So what is it you want to really capture with this? And I think that's difficult, but it might still help.
Yes, and in other words, it is to portray a worldview. If I can put it in those terms, it's to show a specific attitude towards place, space, and time, which I now call spaced out. But yes, it's to say something of that moment, of the cultural moment of spaced outness, if I can call it that.
Yeah. Okay. I see that Jen has pasted another link in the chat. Some possible inspiration for presenting results. I can send you that link.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you, Etienne. That's wonderful.
Yeah, the link is in the chat. I can send it to you as well if you can't see it now, Amanda.
The DH Broadcom. Oh, wonderful. Is it a platform for?
Oh, well, I'll just pop in and comment on that one briefly, if I may.
Sure.
That's not the actual platform. That's just a book that's been published in an online form. That was one of the standard works used for iconography, for Christian iconography, and I converted that into an online version that you can actually view the printed book in an online form. And this refers back to an earlier comment in this chat where you lose the serendipity of the online version that you have in a physical copy. And I'm a very firm believer that you want to retain, because I love books, you want to retain the feel of paging through a book, but you want to have the luxury of doing full text searches, multiple bookmarks and things like that. So unfortunately, it's behind a paywall, so you have to request an evaluation copy to view the contents, but it shows how you can move from the front page where you have a big overview of images and then zoom in to a very specific page in the printed book and still view it as if it's a facsimile of the actual book. So it's maybe just some inspiration for you, Amanda.
Thank you very much. That's wonderful. Thank you.
I was just looking at the website, but it looks pretty cool indeed. I'm not sure if there are any other more questions. We're running now nicely on time. It's 11 o'clock. There's some urgent questions. Otherwise, we'll close this session. Okay, I don't see any question. Lilia says, thank you. No, thank you. Amanda, I really, really enjoyed this presentation. Like I said, to me, this is so different. Working with images and thinking about images in this way. I thought it was a wonderful presentation. I hope it gives a lot of new ideas for people who are here. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Menno, and everyone else. Thank you.